Welcome all. Welcome to the panel 1 of the OECD high-level conference, Technology in and for Society, Innovating Well for Inclusive Transitions. And welcome back to those who had the chance to join us for the high-level roundtable and for the keynote speech of Professor Sheila Jasanoff about new directions of science and emerging technologies in inclusive transition. I'm Angela Simone, and I'm very delighted to be the moderator of the panel 1 today. I'm in the International Initiative Scientific Coordinator at Bassetti Foundation, a civil society organization based in Milan, Italy, aiming at promoting the principles and the practices of responsible innovation for almost 30 years. The mission of Bassetti Foundation is fully aligned with the scope of the panel today, building inclusivity upstream, for its enduring endeavor to engage a wide variety of actors and especially citizens and societal representatives at large in co-designing and co-shaping futures and directions of innovation and emerging technologies. Just to provide you a brief example, I'm currently coordinating the European Commission-funded project called Transform to integrate citizens' voices, values, and needs in local research and innovation strategic policymaking in 3 key regions in Europe, 3 regions that are front-runners in innovation and technology, thanks to sound citizen engagement approaches. Today, citizen engagement, stakeholder and community involvement, inclusivity will be the keywords of this panel, since they are key principles for innovating well. In this session, together with a stellar lineup of speakers, we will explore mechanisms and strategies to enhance societal capacity to anticipate, to steer, to implement, and to appraise such technical changes. We will focus on how enabling inclusion of new actors, such as citizens, research participants, co-creators, co-designers, co-owners, social entrepreneurs, and small firms, since the very outset of the science and technology processes, in shaping together pathways toward just transitions. Pathways in which technology, of course, play a relevant role, but it's not the only player. Pathways in which technology is interpreted as a means to serve public interest. How can we integrate inclusivity in the governance, in the shaping, and in the implementation of emerging technology and innovation? What are the issues to be addressed? And what are the options that we have to effectively solve out these problems? Today, we will go through all these questions thanks to our speakers. Shobhita Parthasarathi, Professor of Public Policy and Director of the Science, Technology and Public Policy Program at the University of Michigan, in the United States. Together with Rick Johnson, Chairman of the BAIC Technology and Innovation Committee at the OECD, but also Rick Johnson serves as a director of the IGEM Foundation. We will go through this question also together with Florina Schneider, Scientific Director of the Institute for Social Ecological Research and Professor in Social Ecology and Transdisciplinarity at Goethe University in Frankfurt in Germany, together with Anil Prakash Joshi, founder of the Himalayan Environmental Studies and Conservation Organization in India, and together with Henriette Vonne-Hill, Head of Unit Economic and Social Transitions at the European Commission. Welcome all to all the panelists of today. I would like to start with listening to Shobhita Parthasarathi. Shobhita Parthasarathi, what are the main issues in grounding inclusive technological innovations? From your experience, how do you think that can be addressed?
Thank you so much, Angela. As we know, technology can have enormous societal benefits, but it has not always lived up to its promises. In some cases, crucial interventions have not actually reached the hands, or in the case of the COVID-19 vaccine, the arms of the people who need it. In others, like the pulse oximeter or spirometer in medical care or facial recognition, the technology reflects or reinforces social biases. And even when a technology seems overwhelmingly good, like solar panels or even mundane technologies like asphalt, their production places disproportionate risks on already marginalized communities. Together, these cases have often amplified growing inequalities, both within and between countries, and that produces public frustration, unrest, and even alienation, with profound impacts for our social and political orders. To address this, I think we need to come back to the title of this conference, Technology for and in Society. Too frequently, we've forgotten this critical dimension and assume that technologies will have the implications that the developers say they will, rather than trying to understand and plan for the complexity of what scholars call socio-technical systems. Put differently, technical expertise does not equal social wisdom. Only social wisdom equals social wisdom. And this means we have to bring publics as well as humanists and social scientists centrally into development. I want to offer 4 principles that might guide this work to ensure it doesn't further erode and perhaps even enhances public trust. And they're based on my research on innovation and equity in the US, UK, Europe, and India. And specifically, I wrote a recent paper called Health Innovation Policy for the People, and that I think can be useful in other domains as well. So first, we need to address the power imbalance between technical experts and communities. In most public engagement initiatives, experts set the terms of the discussion about the problem to be solved or the technology to be considered. NGOs, communities, and when invited, social scientists and humanists can only really influence the conversation and the resulting innovation in a limited way. In the end, communities are often used to legitimate an intervention, but they're not necessarily served by it. The problem with this is not just that it's extractive. Over time, publics become increasingly skeptical of the potential benefits of innovation and suspicious of those developing it. But this can be addressed if those initiating the conversations begin with a more expansive and interdisciplinary lens. Rather than asking, do you like this technology or do you want to participate in its development, you might ask, what are the challenges you face? What world do you want to see? Or what challenges might this technology pose for how you live your lives? The answers might then lead to a variety of interventions, only a subset of them technical, but it will also likely lead us to think more critically about the relationship between technical interventions and their social impact. Second, we need to recognize that the stakes in discussions about emerging science and technology are quite different for technical experts and policymakers than they are for publics, particularly those who are marginalized, who might have limited incomes. The fate of a particular innovation might produce revenue, congratulations, or reputational enhancement for elites. But algorithmic-based social services or using CRISPR to address sickle cell disease can have a profound impact, especially on marginalized communities. But when leaders make decisions about whether and how to pursue a particular area of science or technology, they tend to focus on the aggregate, they tend to focus on the benefits, and minimize challenges or adverse effects, rather than considering the severity of impacts on already vulnerable communities, for example. But how we engage and understand publics is also tied to our understanding of innovation and innovators. We're often too focused on novel, standardized, scalable, and commodifiable interventions and not thinking nearly enough about innovation in public policy, built infrastructure, public health, or pollution remediation. Diagnostic testing for COVID-19, for example, has very limited utility without social supports such as paid leave or comfortable housing during quarantine, which we've learned in the United States. And a more inclusive approach to the definition of innovation will help us engage publics in more productive ways in these innovation processes. And then finally, we need to bring equity considerations into the research funding process itself. This would include assessments of whether the design itself is equitable, whether it will be distributed equitably, whether impacted communities were consulted in the development, and the historical context of whether previous technologies either exacerbated or ameliorated inequality. Social scientists and affected communities are best positioned often to perform these kinds of assessments and need to be more central in the innovation process. So I'll stop there and look forward to the further discussion.
Thank you very much, Subita Parthasarathi, for your inspiring remark, inclusivity, but also taking into account the societal reflection and intervention that can come from social sciences and humanities is a relevant part to be taken into account in shaping inclusivity and upstream engagement. So we definitely need mechanisms and approaches for inclusivity, but perhaps we also need technologists and scientists and researchers and innovators. We are capable of interpreting their role within the society. For these specific education pathways or journey, but also in general, chances to reflect upon how technology can be shaped to respond to societal challenges are really, really needed. IGEM competition, in which IGEM is an acronym, stands for International Genetically Engineered Machine, is trying to address this issue. Rick Johnson, how IGEM approach has been contributing to provide students and early stage researchers in synthetic biology with a wider idea of their role as scientists and as innovators in the future for and with and in society.
Well, thank you, Angela. IGEM actually is a very interesting real-world example of how to engage young people in the intersection of the issues of this conference. It started and remains a global student competition. It's gone from being a small U.S. university competition in the U.S. among 5 schools in 2004. It's now a global bottom-up success story. Where with this year, even with COVID, we had more than 350 university teams from 46 countries. We have more than 100 university teams from China alone. But we also have more than 60,000 alumni. And what IGEM is doing is really providing an interesting case study about 4 sort of interrelated challenges, I think. One is, how do we involve diverse new actors in innovative ways that will lead to more inclusive transitions? A second is, how do we make it about real world situations, not just about abstract principles? And in that context, how do we make it relevant to young people who want their work to have an impact in making a better world? And then finally, how do we better integrate cutting edge technology with thinking hard and engaging in difficult issues on societal considerations and related issues, not just obviously at the end, but from start to finish. So what IGEM does is we have a student competition that remains the core part of IGEM. The students select a topic, and our mantra is local people solving local problems using synthetic biology. And so they come up with a team, they come up with a project to try to solve some problem. Now, let me just give you a couple of examples. The grand prize winner this year was Toulouse. Congratulations to them. They engineered a new way for the sustainable production of violet fragrances made from atmospheric carbon dioxide. We had a runner-up team from National University of Singapore that used synthetic biology for biomanufacturing that can boost the agricultural yields of high-density urban farms very sustainably. And every year there's a remarkable number of projects that come up. A team from Ghana addressed the environmental problems of gold mining in their country by developing a biosensor for gold detection that could replace the use of toxic chemicals such as mercury. Or a team from Colombia worked on developing a synthetic biology solution to defend against fungi and other pathogens that were attacking coffee plants in Colombia, and of course, therefore threatening an important crop from the Colombian economy. So all of these are about pushing the boundaries of synthetic biology. But they're much more than that, because from the beginning, IGEM has sought to create a culture of responsibility, respect, and inclusion by including non-technical values, by asking students to think hard about the societal considerations and implications of what they do. And so, for example, biosafety and biosecurity, public outreach and engagement, ethical implications, sustainability, collaboration, and new ways to think about inclusion, all have been key parts of IGEM from the start, because the students must include them in their project from the very beginning of the design all the way through to the judging and the presentation. And it's an important component of how they are judged. And actually they respond to the incentives quite well. But it's really remarkable about how students have around the world embraced this approach enthusiastically. For many of them, this is really the first time that they have really been asked to think hard and deeply about the societal implications writ large, about what they're doing in the lab or on the computer or in their science and engineering projects. And so it's created community norms, it's created best practices, it's raised new opportunities. And one of the consequences is, because of the success of IGEM, there are now 60,000 alumni of IGEM in more than 60 countries, and they're bringing with them this new sort of culture of responsibility to what they're doing next. And in fact, we now also have a new program, because we have so many alumni all of a sudden, called After IGEM, and it is continuing that process. It's not only focusing on the science and in the engineering to solve problems, but it's about networking, about anticipatory governance and policy. There's a group on diversity, equity, and inclusion, open science and accessibility, and new ways to do public engagement. And so what we're really seeing is how it's really provided a way in which young people become key influencers and actors to fundamentally shape the direction of a critical new technology, in this case, synthetic biology. I might mention there's one last part of IGEM that doesn't frequently get attention, but I think is also important, which is the registry of biological parts. IGEM has created a biological parts of 20,000 biological parts that the students can use. It's an open source technology, and it's a get, give, and share philosophy. And so it just supplements the other considerations as we move forward. But the point I want to leave everyone with is that there is an interesting real world example of how one can create a laboratory for responsible research, innovation, and societal considerations, where they are integrated throughout the process of the activity. I'll leave it there and come back some more, Angela.
Thank you very much, Rick Johnson. A real world example of putting together different perspectives. So to combining, of course, the technological career and disciplines together with values and societal problems. Florina Schneider, as we have learned, transdisciplinarity is definitely a key feature of the IGEM competition, as we have learned from Rick Johnson, but definitely a feature of fair, inclusive transition. Also, I've been listened to Shubhita Parthasarathi before. So pulling together different perspectives coming not just from the technological and scientific world. So can we really add transdisciplinarity as a further keyword of today? And this can be an effective approach to achieve inclusivity in research and innovation practices and processes.
Thanks a lot. I will focus on insights from my own work, and this is on transdisciplinary in the field of sustainability. So I look into issues of sustainable use and governance of natural resources such as soil, water, and land. For example, we just concluded a project on sustainable land management in Myanmar, Laos, and Madagascar. And we looked into cases where access to land is increasingly contested. Local communities want land to grow food and make a living. Companies want land for commercial agriculture, for example, for oil palm or rubber monoculture. And conservation-focused governmental agencies or environmental NGOs want to protect the land, namely the prestigious forests, which they consider global hotspots of biodiversity and important means for climate change protection. And of course, all these claims somehow are valuable, and there are at least 3 reasons why in such situations we need to include various stakeholders through transdisciplinary process, often from the very project beginning. So in the first reason is that these situations are incredibly complex. Any single discipline is too narrow to grasp the full complexity. So in our teams, we usually have transdisciplinary expertise. We have natural scientists to study how the different land uses affect ecosystem health. We have social scientists to investigate the impacts on human well-being. But we also have various stakeholders, societal actors, for example, development NGOs with their years of experiences working with the local people, or government representatives knowing the field, the political field, or the room of maneuver to enact change. And the second reason is that these situations are very contested, and the different stakeholders have very different perspectives on what sustainable solutions are. For example, we were talking on a forest conservation area in this region, and it became clear that it can protect the biodiversity of the forests, but at the same time, it also hindered the local people to use the same land for subsistence agriculture to make their living. So is this sustainable? Or in which situation is it sustainable? To discuss this question, we had to bring together all these different competences and to discuss with the societal actors, because at least in democratic societies, it's clear that these normative questions cannot be decided by science. They must be based on societal deliberations. And the third reason is that we aim to generate knowledge which is truly actionable, so which helps the different actors to enact change. So this means we need to include the perspectives of the actors involved. For example, what are their knowledge needs? What is their room of maneuver? Or what are their interests and priorities? But how intensively do we need to collaborate with the stakeholders? Do we always have to involve all the actors throughout the whole research project? Or is it enough to just involve them in the beginning or in the middle or in the end? I'm investigating these questions with my team, and our current finding is very clear. It depends. It depends on many factors. Often it is indeed important to involve stakeholders from the very beginning, but not always. I'd like to give you an example on this. On a study on participation in sustainable water management, we had a project which investigated strategies to tackle the risks of glacier lake outbursts in the Swiss Alps, which happen as a consequence of climate change. So when the glaciers melt due to climate change, lakes can be formed, and these can outburst and then put the downstream villagers at risk. In the first moment, when the researchers started this project, the villagers were not interested at all to participate because they didn't believe in this risk. So the researchers just started their measurements without stakeholder involvement. Only after about 2 years, when they were able to show the first results, the villagers and other stakeholders become interested because they started to realize what might happen in the future with the climate change scenario. And only then so the research together with the villagers and other stakeholders were able to develop more holistic solutions to this issue, solutions which combined, for example, hydropower plants and touristic development. The big challenge, and also the art, I'd say, of doing transdisciplinary research and doing stakeholder inclusion is to know in which situations stakeholders should be involved, in which form. And with this, I end my starting statement.
Thank you, Florina Schneider. Many times we take for granted that stakeholders and communities and cities are really willing to participate and to be involved, but we need to take into account the context, the framework, and also the kind of process, because as you have already mentioned, there are situations in which the stakeholder engagement need to be carefully managed, and we need to insert their voices in not in at the very beginning, but perhaps in the middle. But we need to provide the space to listen to them and to know when they really would like to be on board, to embrace the pathway of the process of engagement. But I think that the most relevant thing is to provide always a seat at the table of the decision-making on the processes of research and innovation to citizens and to community, to work with them. Anil Prakash Joshi, could you please provide your experience in this, in working side by side with communities and empowering them in the processes of research and innovation, and for a local resourcing working with local communities?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invite. I'll focus on the rural community and technology and inclusivity. You'll agree with me that even today, 21st century we have entered, the rural communities are still devoid of knowledges, and they are not equipped with the technology and so on, which their counterparts otherwise are enjoying. And this has largely caused economic disparity, and that led to trigger the migration from rural to urban in search of jobs. So many things have happened, and we'll agree that the major reason which we find why does it happen, the number one, the rural community do not have a very strong say in overall technology development and other things. And also the important is that they are the one who is the producer is unaware of the priority, and particularly Knowledge Institute who are working for the rural community are unaware of it. And however, we will not deny that some of the technology that the Knowledge Institute have been developing, but in majority of cases, they have not been found very relevant. And the simple reason was the inclusivity, the feature, like the cost effectiveness, feasibility, affordability issues, and the more important is skill matching. The rural community do not have that skill. When I imagine a problem, I develop a technology in my own way, and if I impose on them, it doesn't match with their skill. That means we do not even have a feedback mechanism. Whatever technology we have developed through the Knowledge Institute, and then we put it to the rural community, when suddenly we do not have any data, how many of them have been good and so on. And that is one reason many things are missing when we develop technology, and we lack the inclusivity. That is what we have found. Now, more important is there is no producer and users connect. There is no mechanism as such where the producer know what, and they have a very poor understanding of demography, social structure, skill level of the community, and that doesn't help in that case what kind of a technology and relevance that we can find through the process, which unfortunately is largely missing. Moreover, we have found that the wisdom, which the community wisdom is not respected, acknowledged while we develop it. The community innovations unfortunately are not taken and understood while we develop the technology. And understanding must be very strong that the wisdom only can bring an appropriateness which has come from the ages, and whereas the new knowledge can make the efficiency and more productive the technology. And it has to be ultimately the participatory mechanism, and there has to be a participatory technology development mechanism, so that whatever both user and producer, when they work together for a technology, and appropriateness come, and also the technology become very relevant also. I'm giving you two very important examples to support what I'm talking about. Watermill, a second century technology, even today it is in many part of the mountains working, and it is used corn and wheat grinding mainly. This technology, when we try to upgrade it and source a technology institute to develop this, they develop a cross flow turbine. When we put this cross flow turbine in the watermill, we suddenly found it was not suitable, because the water in the mountain contains the sand which cut the blade, and it collapsed within 2-3 months. Now this watermiller brought back his wooden turbine and saying that my technology is steady, stable, maybe it is slow, but it is more important. This is one example where unfortunately we have not been doing, but we tried that. We do it, and we develop a technology in a participatory mode. We have reached 6,000 villages now today, while a simple technology which we develop in a participation, and now it is cost effective. It has got all services, which post installation services that are available, and it is totally a technology which is a contributory, and the priority that it assists. So what I'm trying to say is that the communities is important. If we really want to work for a rural society, we have to have a participatory mechanism to develop a technology.
Thanks a lot. So advancing technology, not for the sake of technology, but technology that can really serve the interest of communities. So sometimes we need slow technology, frugal innovation, not a really sophisticated, advanced technology that really can encounter the needs of the community with which we need to work to produce technology and innovation for the public interest. Institutional support can foster the diffusion of upstream engagement and also drive the wide usage of inclusivity of new actors in the process of research and innovation. The European Commission has a long history of policies devoted to this, such as the responsible research and innovation approach, also very diffuse with its acronym RRI, an approach that has accompanied the 8th framework program to support research and innovation in Europe throughout its duration. From an institutional point of view, Henriette van Hill, what are the main issues in promoting inclusion, and what kind of intervention the European Commission has elaborated or is experimenting in its current policies to support inclusivity in research and innovation processes?
Hello, Angela. Hello, everyone. Many thanks for the invitation. It feels like being part of the OECD family again. I was here 10 years ago on demand-side innovation policies. I really support all the events of OECD. These are a forum for us as policymakers, as think tanks, as decision makers to come together and to reflect on challenges like this. So thank you so much for this timely event. Obviously, the European Commission is doing this together with the EU member states and with many, many associated states. Maybe my intervention has maybe 3 challenges that I see, and also 3 examples of how we act. So coming from the challenges, first challenge I see is that the speed of our policy cycle is dramatically increased. For example, all the COVID research, innovation funding, we had to do this in a time period of days. We had policy feedback cycles of hours. decision makers in local communities and national administrators, they needed to know what can they do? Do they need to? What kind of evidence do they need to close schools, to close facilities? What are the preparedness measures? So that policy cycle, but we also see that in climate, from policy cycles of 10, 20 years, we're now looking at months or years where you have really a speeding up of deployment of innovation. Maybe the second point is about complexity. We used to all sit on our technological silos, and this was all fine. But now what I see is that a lot of technology and policies that determine that technology are converging, are crisscrossing each other. Again, an example on the health side, we have invested millions and millions on e-health applications. And now with COVID, unfortunately, it was very disruptive. And now we suddenly see that e-health consultations can be possible, can be reimbursed, can be done in systems. Maybe the third challenge is, and I think a previous panelist referred to this as well, is ensuring equality, ensuring just transitions, ensuring that research innovation is deployed in a just way. So now, in the final minute that I have, I think, what are the three ways that the Commission is acting? A first way, and that was also mentioned by Jean-Eric, is that we are co-creation research innovation policy together with sector policies. This co-creation right from the beginning of our funding program, where policy makers articulate their R&I needs. This is really hard, but it needs to be done. It is essential prep time for how to prioritize funding, but also other types of policies. The other part that I've learned, especially from the COVID side, is that we need to have new, quicker funding tools with new actors involving new types of organizations. And this can be any type of organization that helps us to deploy and to co-create this innovation quicker. You should not look at whether they have the special mandate or how we will sort out how we're going to do the contract, but get them involved very quickly. And then finally, and this is what it matters to us all a lot, and that is equality also has EU values that are reflected in how we work and will regulate artificial intelligence, how we look after dealing with personal data. And also in our own funding programs from next year onwards, if you want to get funding from the EU funding programs as a public institution in Europe, you need to offer a gender equality plan. And why is that? We see that a lot of research and innovation is spent on projects where gender equality or where gender issues are not taken into account, whether that is medical research, research is done on female or male cohorts or other types of research, for example, in transport safety concerns. So those three challenges of speed, complexity, and equality, as well as then how to address it with co-creation, faster tools, and also really keeping in mind EU ethical values. And that's where I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Henriette von Eyl. I will stay with you to try to go in depth with one of the elements that you have mentioned, which is the pandemic situation. Definitely the pandemic situation, we know it's very hard to be overcome, but perhaps this situation we can learn from this situation also in terms of inclusion and widening the audience of the actors that can be involved in research and innovation. I would like to share a very brief example from Italy. In the first wave of the pandemic, there was not only in Italy, of course, but across Europe, but also across the world, a shortage of medical equipment. In Italy, we had these examples of great collaboration and contribution from different kind of actors of research and innovation, not the usual suspects, especially from Fab Labs that created different medical equipment, but really effective in try to support clinicians and hospitals to go ahead and to cure the patients for the COVID disease. So an opportunity to somehow exploit their creativity, their ideas that can be used also not only in time of emergency, but to really explore other actors, other sources for research and innovation. This is something that an institution from the European Commission is really thinking about. So learning from the experience of the COVID emergency with cross collaboration, unexpected cross collaboration that we have seen can be the norm for the future activities and the future support for research and innovation processes.
Mm-hmm. Well, when last March, so firstly, last January, on the 30th of January, the European Union was the first international organization that made funding available for COVID-19 research. We waited for the WHO press release, and we always have in our funding programs one sentence, and it's called Other Action 6. And this will give us, and I think this will give us the opportunity to, the legal basis to quickly mobilize funding for pandemic preparedness or for really major issues. I think this is something that now many other institutions will also have. You have to have some flexibility in the instruments. The other part, what we did already early last year, was to look in our whole portfolio. We mobilized something like 200 colleagues who looked in their project portfolio, and we asked them, is there anything that you can do to help? And we had colleagues from the airspace side coming in to say, well, we have ventilation, and we know something about ventilation. We had colleagues from coatings side who had projects about that, and all these projects wanted to come in and mobilize their efforts. The other part what we did was to really look at gap analysis. After the first big funding rounds, we worked together with international institutions and member states, and we looked at what are the issues that we have not addressed yet. And already in April, May, it turned out that mental health issues is a major issue in COVID, and dealing with COVID on so many different levels. So we set up a special call where projects could submit ideas, but in each project, the end user, the local communities had to be in the lead, of articulating the need. So those are two examples how we try to mobilize existing instruments, but we could not have done it without many other colleagues in the capitals, in the institutions, in research, in companies that did this with us together. So thank you to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Henriette von Hiel. Talking about cross-collaboration, upstream engagement, all these kind of processes requires capacity in doing so, and very often researchers, innovators, institutions in general also committed to implement this kind of stakeholder engagement, citizen engagement, don't have any training or capacity for doing this. And we don't see any reward for innovators and researchers that really would like to embrace this kind of approach, also in terms of career progression, for instance. So to see really an added value for this effort. So Florina Schneider, perhaps do we need a systemic change in order to really address this problem and to implement meaningful stakeholder engagement? So we need capacity, but we also need to reward, incentivize this kind of processes.
Yes, I really believe that we need a systemic change to make this happen, because the current incentive systems quite often don't support sufficiently the the researchers, especially the young researchers, to really go for this type of research and technology development. And of course, there are many good examples. I mean, we just heard also from Henriette that several funders, they really go into this direction and try to set up novel programs with novel criteria. But as a whole, I think the system is still lacking behind. And I just like to mention one example. I think it's really interesting. It's the LIRA 2030 program of the International Science Council. This is a research program which fosters African leadership in doing transdisciplinary sustainability science. And it combines a grant for young scholars with extensive capacity building activities, and also career development activities, and also institution support activities. And we did an accompanying research about it, and we could really see how these different elements were crucial for the young scientists to implement transdisciplinary research and to also make a career. So not just that they have once a grant to be able to do this kind of research, but that they can, with these competences, really also do a career and then find a job where exactly these competences are estimated.
Thank you, Florina Schneider, Rick Johnson. I think this is something that rings some bell to you from the IGEM approach. So all the students embarking on the IGEM competition and the IGEM approach are fully equipped to tackle societal challenges, of course, dealing with synthetic biology. But the approach of the IGEM competition has had an impact also in other tech communities as a sort of role model or inspiring example to be followed, or even in governing and regulating synthetic biology. So take into account the approach pursued by the IGEM approach.
Oh, yes, I think it has impacts in a number of different ways. One is it's showing that after the student competition, the values that are in the competition can carry forward throughout a career. So as I mentioned before, we now have 60,000 alumni. They're moving into their own research labs. They're now teaching the next generation, but they're also in government ministries. They are in civil society groups. They're starting businesses. In fact, IGEM has more than 200 companies have come out of IGEM. Very good example is those of you who participated in the first session, Jason Kelly. Jason Kelly was on the very first MIT IGEM team in the early 2000s. And what was in that team became Ginkgo Bioworks, the company that's now worth $15 billion. But more importantly, or equally importantly, is that the values of IGEM got embedded among the founders of the company. So many of those social considerations, as you heard Jason articulate, are fully a part of how they're approaching these issues. Another area I think is important in terms of the impact is we're in an era of influencers, right? Any of us who have kids know how important those interactions are for shaping what they do, what they think. And so what's happening with a number of the IGEM participants thinking about these issues is that they linked with social media, linked with new types of engagement with publics that they have started at IGEM, they are becoming key influencers in ways that government agencies, that university professors, that others just cannot reach and have the same impact in a positive way. And then the third thing I just might mention is then, and this is a challenge as well as something trying to do, is how to scale up and scale out this type of approach. So for example, in IGEM, the thing we're just embarking on is creating regional leagues around the world. Sort of think FIFA without the corruption. So the very first pilot is in Latin America. And having Latin American teams addressing issues within their own area and shaping the development of emerging technologies in Latin America. And they will have leagues of teams and competitions, just like we do globally, that are more oriented to the specifics of Latin American needs. And we're planning to do that around the world. So I think it's having a big impact by showing that you can actually integrate these societal considerations into emerging technologies, and it's not an either-or proposition. It makes the science and engineering better. It makes it more responsible, and you can do it from the outset. It's not an afterthought, and that's what we're trying to get at IGEM. And I think that's what is beginning to be seen in some other domains. The last point I'd make about that is, really synthetic biology is all about convergence. It's about converging disciplines for advancing our capabilities. So we have designers, we have social scientists, we have ethicists, we have biologists and engineers, of course, all coming together. And the question is how we can create the additional crosstalk and intersections among the more traditional approaches that are going to result in new ways, new mindsets, new approaches, so that we get the benefits of the technology. We think deeply about the risk or what might go wrong and take account of them and change direction as need be. And that we are very, very mindful about the need to not make these just for elites, of how we make this much more inclusive.
Thank you, Rick Johnson. So definitely you need a capacity and a training to really implement a meaningful process, because the quality of the engagement, the quality of the inclusion process really counts a lot and can make the difference. But sometimes it seems that nowadays inclusion, inclusivity, citizen engagement, stakeholder engagement are sort of buzzwords and something that you have to insert into your process in a sort of checklist. So without taking into account and taking into consideration the quality of the process. But we really need just participation, or we really need meaningful participation? And what does it mean, meaningful participation? What is your perspective, Shobita Parthasarathi, about this? We need participation for the sake of involving someone out of the usual suspects, or we really need to focus on the quality of this kind of engagement, this kind of inclusivity?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the first thing, and I want to pick up maybe as the last person speaking in this round on some of the themes that some of my fellow panelists discussed. And I think that the first thing we need to think about when we think about meaningful public engagement is that we actually have experts in this space, often social scientists, sometimes humanists, who can help to facilitate this, identify communities, who often have longstanding relationships with communities, which are crucial to ensure trusted engagement, and who can help us do the kind of work that Sheila Jasanoff talked about in her keynote, which is to unravel the assumptions behind our methods of engagement. So, I mentioned in my opening remarks that that often there's a power imbalance between technical experts and communities, and those are often embedded in the structure of public engagement, as I suggested. And I think that social scientists actually can play a crucial role, certainly social scientists who specialize in science and technology. And I sometimes worry that while I'm absolutely thrilled about the turn to inclusive innovation, or in other terms, tech for good or data for good, or attempts to kind of engage ethical social implications, there's this assumption that that this can be knowledge provided and absorbed by the technical community itself. And that, I think, is a real missed opportunity. Because there are experts who can help really structure and provide really important engagement and maximize the quality of that engagement. And at the same time, I think for research funding agencies, demonstrate the real relevance and importance of the social sciences in these conversations. That is often really lost. And it's something that we try to do at University of Michigan. I run a program where we train students primarily from the sciences and engineering in sort of critical ways of thinking about science and technology policy, and then they go off often into policy positions or into scientific positions, but with a really nuanced understanding of how to do that work. And with that then comes, with social science comes a suite of methods, right? So in addition to being able to understand the assumptions behind our structures of public deliberation, for example, there are ideas from, for example, the field of public health. Community-based participatory research is one of them. And there are some echoes with some of the deliberative democratic approaches that are used in public engagement, but the CBPR approach really tries to start where the community is, and often there are really interesting ethnographic approaches where scholars work with communities to understand where they are, what they care about, and to go to Anil Prakash Joshi's point, what are the kinds of innovation they are already engaged in, and how can that be amplified or supplemented with technical, highly specialized knowledge. Social scientists can often provide that bridge towards meaningful public engagement that is more open-ended than the highly structured methods that I critiqued in my opening statement. And then I'll just finally say that the meaningful public engagement also really is dependent on trusted relationships. They cannot be one-off, in and out kinds of interventions. And too frequently, I think that's easier to do. But the problem is that doesn't generate the kind of engagement that I think we all want to see to ensure that technology achieves its social benefits.
Thank you, Shobhita Parthasarathi. Start with the community, where the community is, and trusted relationship. I think these are really two powerful messages, and I really would like to invite Anil Prakash Joshi to comment on these two relevant remarks from Shobhita Parthasarathi. Trusted relationship with the community. This is something that cannot be built up just in one shot of collaboration with the community. So it's a long-term approach that you have to pursue, and you really need to start where the community is. What you would like to, do you would like to comment on?
Thank you very much. I think we really need to set a trend. The trend will be, while doing so, we'll have to have a common platform for producer and the users. And if we begin with that, see both stakeholders at one platform, where the users will realize the priorities and the producer will accordingly work on that. So I believe that if we can go into, immediately we can have several rounds of discussion that we'll have to find out between the users and the producer of different nature, and users priorities of different nature. If we do that several rounds, we will come up with a SOP, standard operating procedure, where scientists, technologists, knowledge institutes, and the users of with the different priorities, what kind of SOP we can develop. And immediately, which I realize after that, we need to have we'll have to develop showcases. I mean, many showcases, so that such showcase will help to do the advocacy in favor of the rural people of the country, or the rural part, those who are living. So several rounds of discussion, dialogue, meeting to develop a SOP, and then of course to support the same. We really need to have the showcases, so that the challenge today is that half of the world do not have technology, even first generation. What they had been doing in the 200, 300 years ago, they are still practicing the same. If we can do a users producer dialogue discussion, and then we can also mobilize the youth, as has been pointed out earlier also, to go into this discussion and a dialogue series, they will definitely be contributing a lot. And then ultimately, I would say having two things together, the short developing showcases and the round of discussion, we can do a long-term socio-political advocacy. So this is very important. Until we bring them in a form of policy, a long-term policy, I think we will not be able to effect and bring the inclusivity in our technology development processes.
Thanks a lot. In the meantime, I have one question from the audience. I kindly remind you that, of course, you have the possibility to write up some questions, some comments to the audience in the chat tools of Zoom. So building capacity for inclusion, both the includers and the included, is a visible theme across many of the points brought up by the panel. How to approach building capacity in such diverse stakeholders, groups, organizations, and institutions? This is a question for the panel. Someone from the 5 speakers would like to start to try to provide a response to this question from the audience. So capacity building for the wide range of stakeholders in this process, that of course there is also a competence asymmetries in this wide variety of different actors in the group. Florina Schneider, yeah, please. I pass on back.
I like that the person asks about not only the competences of the includers, but also the included, right? It somehow needs capacities on both sides or on all the different sides. And I wanted to say that we also need to tailor the capacity building means. For example, when I work with PhD students, I train them, for example, on methods, transdisciplinary methods, and critical reflections, and all these more science related skills, but of course also facilitation skills. But when I work in a village in Myanmar, for example, where people are usually not able to read and write, or only on a very basic level, it's a completely different situation. And I think it's not about teaching them about what in this way. It's rather about also adapting our methods so that they can really participate with the competences they have. But throughout the process, we often observed that things like empowerment happens. Yeah, that it's not like a training we give to them for capacity building, but that we design our process in a way that, for example, they learn to speak out. So in Myanmar, it was a very challenging issue that people were not used to speak out. After 60 years dictatorship time, yeah, they were just not used to say, that's my future wish. Yeah? So, but then after now the 6-year project, we have a completely different dynamics in the team.
So we need to learn about the methodologies and the strategies to engage different kind of stakeholders. But even if with the long list, and now we have tons of experience, tons of examples of tested citizen engagement methodologies approach, we really need to adapt the approach to the context and to the public or the communities that we would like to involve. We really need a tailored approach for working with communities, with publics, and of course there is not a one solution fits for all, but we really need to start to listen to the community, to the stakeholder needs, and then try to find out what is the best methodology to be implemented, grounded, to really emerge the needs and the visions and the values of the communities, of the citizens involved in the process. There are other comments from the panel about this point. Otherwise, we have a further questions from the audience. In what ways might scientific tech agenda setting be part of the key towards inclusivity?
I can take briefly and just say that I think part of the way that understandably, but part of the way our research funding agencies and our governments are often structured according to technical problems or technical areas. And they're less likely to be structured, perhaps with rare exception, according to the problem, according to the social problem. And I think that if we start to, whether it's in government policy making, public policy making, or university policy making, or elsewhere, if we think in terms of the social problem and then think about how we actually solve the social problem, what is the role that technology might play? Not only does that destabilize the central role that technical experts might play, but it already kind of suggests that we might have roles for members of affected communities, social scientists, et cetera, to play. And I think that part of that is really embedded in the structure of these institutions. And that's an easy way, I think, to address that.
Perhaps indeed talking about research agenda setting is part of the problem, because we are not talking about problem setting and finding solutions that can be, of course, based on technology and research or innovation, but a sort of part of a wider set of elements that can contribute to respond to the problems. So perhaps also research agenda setting means that we will categorize all the responses according to research disciplines, technology, context, and this kind of things. So perhaps a very wide systemic change is needed to really insert inclusivity in a broad sense, as we have intended in this panel today, to really address the many issues that we have explored today. I kindly
maybe Angela.
Yep, sure.
To pick up on Shivita, 2 years ago, my Director General reorganized DG Research in the European Commission, and he did that along the SDGs. So, and that is why my unit is called Economic and Social Transitions. And it has had far-reaching consequences. It brought together many different technologies, many different stakeholders, many different processes. So that's maybe one thing. We are also trying to look into, or we are now trying to roll out missions. You take a society, kind of the Mazzucato thinking, you take a societal challenge, and then you discuss with mission critical people, whether these are cancer patients or cities or coastal regions, to say, okay, what are the technologies that we need to achieve specific societal goals? But I think, and now I'm talking as a funding agency, what is really quite difficult, and in especially anything linked to social sciences, and that is that whereas in, for example, transport engineering, we can try to predict a technology roadmap. This is for social inclusion. This is much more difficult to do, and that's a big weakness of many systems. So when I used to work in transport, we could see when plus or minus 2-3 years, autonomous cars would be on the road, and we could kind of walk back and see, okay, this is the type of technology funding that we need. We can also do this on social science, but that is far less developed than on some of the other more technology-driven sectors. So maybe that is what I would like to provide from a very personal working level perspective. Thank you.
And I might just, if I might add agreement with my my panelists on a couple of points. One is, I think the reorientation of many of our policies around mission-oriented or goal-driven, in the case of IGEM, or things that are problem-oriented, solutions-driven, provides a new opportunity to rethink how we integrate many of these considerations so that they are aligned and recognize that it's not just the technological or scientific side that's going to be part of the solution. It's got to be, and I think as Henriette just said, it's a systems thing. It's complex, which is both a challenge and an opportunity to do. The second thing I want to pick up on a prior point is, I think we have real opportunities, and this may be more in the nature of completed comment also, to sort of expand the toolkit of ways in which we're doing this, and creating, using real world laboratories. I tried to give a couple examples on IGEM, but many were to see what works, what doesn't work in this domain. We can do wonderful principles, we can do wonderful discussions, but we need to actually concretely see how we do this. And I think there are a lot of lessons can be learned, and I think the OECD can play a major role in helping us analyze and look at what some of those may be. And the last point while I'm speaking is just, I think the point that we're all making is we have a new multipolarity of actors, and that changes the equation for everything, and particularly for government. And the government has been slow to respond to the fact that now there is a multipolarity of really influential drivers in all of these domains. And so as we think through them, we have to rethink what this means, how it can be directed, and including, clearly we need anticipatory governance. This provides new opportunities. But one of the deficits, or one of the challenges we have on governance, and I'll be perhaps a little provocative here, is that within government, across all the OECD countries and partner countries, we have a number of experts who have science and engineering and technological expertise. But what we don't have is literacy is the wrong word, but enough policymakers who could really explain to you, or who understand the nature of these emerging technologies, not as experts, but just as something that they should be familiar with, as the same way that they need to know X amount about economics, about policymaking, et cetera. And so we have a government deficit that needs to be addressed when we start talking about anticipatory governance. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rick Johnson. I kindly invite you, all the panelists, to provide a very, very short final remark as a sort of takeaway message for our audience. So I would like to start with Florina Schneider.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I had a...
Sorry, just a very brief takeaway message for the audience to wrap up our panel today.
So my takeaway message is that we discussed a lot that stakeholder involvement processes need to be high quality. They need to be carefully designed to be meaningful. And we need to reflect a lot about why we actually need the stakeholder processes. Why do we want them? And what is the wishes of the stakeholders in the different fields? What are their needs for inclusion? Is it about justice? Is it about actionability? Is it about including different perspectives? And I believe for that, we really need to foster capacity building, and we need to work towards transformation of the science and innovation systems.
Thank you, Florina Schneider. Henriette von Hiel, would you like to start from here for your final remark?
Yeah, two follow-up actions, really, proposals. I think we're looking at inclusive directionality of our inclusive, sustainable directionality of our policies. And the second challenge that I'm working on and would be very interested in doing this together with OECD and many other organizations is to look at ways of assessing progress, monitoring and assessing progress. We're trying to do this ourselves using transition performance index or other kind of beyond GDP activities. But what would that look like? I would be very interested in that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Johnson, your final remark, your takeaway message for today.
Well, listening to the conversation, I'm actually left with thinking about a quotation from Goethe about that knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. And I think that's what we need to move forward with. We must do.
We must do. Thank you. Anil Prakash Joshi, your final remark for today.
I would say that when half of the world is deprived of technology, rural people who are primary producer also, it is not the moral only duties or ethics, but it is more important that the urban survive with the rural primary producer. So our moral responsibility also will become that we equip them with the knowledge and technology.
Thank you very much. And Shobita Parthasarathi, your final remark or takeaway message.
Sure, thank you. So I want to surface some of the challenges, again, of engaging publics from the perspective of experts. I think that it's important to remember that experts are, that includes myself, of course, aren't necessarily used to or comfortable with listening. We're not necessarily used to the complex and long-term structure of public engagement or hearing no. Nor are we necessarily accustomed to thinking about complexities when it comes to technology like cost, access, and risk, and incorporating that into early stages of development. But that said, I'm really heartened that we are engaged in discussion, that inclusive innovation has become a buzzword, that we're thinking about technology for good, as I mentioned earlier, and that I think scientists really have good intentions. And so the challenge is that good intentions aren't enough, but the good news is that we are starting these conversations, we're providing scaffolding that can hopefully be helpful.
Thank you very much. We definitely need more conversation like this to go ahead in reflecting and implementing effective upstream engagement in inclusivity. Thank you very much. Thanks to all the panelists. And I really would like to thank also all the attendees to this panel. The day one is not already ended up. So after a short break, we will be back for the final session, which will be a conversation on values-driven development of emerging technologies in an international context between Mr. Tarun Shabra from the National Security Council in the United States and Mr. James Wilsdon from the University of Sheffield in UK. Thanks again, and see you in a few minutes for the final session.